Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Daily Friend Show. I am Makone, and I'm going to be hosting you today whilst Nicholas is away on leave. Sarah mentioned something about him being in a bush somewhere, so while he's doing that, there'll be a bevy of hosts taking you through the show this week. And for today, that's me. I'm not alone though. I've got two co-hosts with me, familiar faces to the Daily Friend Show, Sarah and Martin from Staden. But before we pan over to them, I'm just going to read a word from our sponsors and then we'll find out how they're doing. Exchanges are crashing, banks are on the run and being bailed out, and the money printed is running faster than ever. Bitcoin was built for this, but it is worthless if it's kept on an exchange, which then collapses. Enter Bitvice, South Africa's only place to buy Bitcoin and have it sent directly to your own self-custody. That means should Bitvice ever shut down, your Bitcoin is entirely safe, as it is fully in your control, like having gold in your own safe at home, rather than at the bank with only a receipt to prove ownership. Bitvice offers advice on how to set up the best self-custody solution to achieve maximum security for your Bitcoin and keep it safe during tumultuous times ahead. To make accumulating Bitcoin even easier, Bitvice's SAT Stacker allows you to set up repeat purchases of Bitcoin on weekly or monthly basis. Bitvice is the safest way to accumulate Bitcoin. Head over to bitvice.io to set up your account today or click the link in the description to find out more about SAT Stacker. Okay. Sarah, Martin, how do you do today? Let's start with you, Sarah.
No, I'm fine. I'm very. It's just funny looking at a comment in the commenting section. We're going to end up with a situation of too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Pardon the expression. I'm sure it's not very politically correct, but
Kosher. Martin?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah. It's Nicholas is missed, but things are not going to fall apart without him. I'm sure he'll be pleased to know.
Definitely. Not with the two of you here, of course. First story of today is the salacious indictment of former president and leading opposition party candidate for the next election run, Donald Trump in the US. It says here that Donald Trump, the ex-president and front-runner for the Republican 2024 nomination, flew into New York City on Monday for an historic court appearance to face charges stemming from a probe into hush money paid to a porn star. So we know that this is an apparent or alleged relationship, which Trump denies, that occurred in 2016, that Trump paid hush money for in 2016 to keep out of the news headlines during his presidential run then. Trump had this to say about the director attorney, that the corrupt DA has no case, Trump said on his social media platform, Truth Social, of the Manhattan District Attorney prosecuting the case. What he does have is a venue where it is impossible for me to get a fair trial. The Manhattan grand jury that indicted Trump heard evidence for months this year about a $130,000 payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels in the waning days of the 2016 presidential campaign. So this is a case of many firsts. First leading opposition party candidate to be indicted, first former president to be indicted. He was also, I think this case was ongoing while he was sitting as president. Martin, let's start with you. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, look, as I think all of us are dedicated to the rule of law. I think a part of it is to be happy that this has finally happened in the U.S. I think they've had presidents who've gotten away with bloody murder without ever having seen the inside of a court, and former presidents as well. So it's good that the U.S. is maybe taking the step where the mystique of the presidency is going to be broken a little bit to allow for criminal law initiatives to be taken against powerful political elites. So that's good in the abstract. On the other hand, I'm not sure what the applicable American law is here. Now, being somewhat familiar with South African law, I don't think there is such a thing as a crime to pay someone hush money. I think it's perfectly legal to tell someone, please don't share a secret. Here's some money. I think I have no moral qualms with someone doing that. Certainly, it does have some political implications if that is true. Donald Trump is the leader of a conservative party, and if he did have this type of relationship, there's certainly to be some kind of political consequences for that. I'm just not sure that criminal law necessarily has to be part of it. I think Trump has probably done other things that he should probably be looked into criminally for. Um, I don't know, the so-called riot or the insurgency or whatever at the U.S. Capitol. If he had a hand in that, maybe that's something to look into. This seems a bit. It seems a bit weak. It seems desperate at some level. And unfortunately, I think that could undermine the broader rule of law point. If the first time this happens, it's on such porous grounds that it's not really a big deal. And this is when they go after presidents or former presidents. It's when it's not really a big deal, but the big stuff, no, we don't touch that. So I'm a bit concerned about that aspect of it. But like I said, in principle, if this has the desired effect of the U.S. justice system, in fact, applying the idea that the law applies equally between the powerful elite and ordinary people, then it's a good thing. I'm just not sure that the technical details of this specific case are going to allow that to happen.
Yeah, so we know that paying hush money is to your mistress is not illegal. In fact, they couldn't get him on those charges, so they moved it over to, I think, falsification of business records, because this money was paid by his lawyer and then Trump reimbursed the lawyer, but in his books it was recorded as legal fees or something like that. Sarah, Sarah, is this a case of politicizing the criminal justice system?
I think
getting into dangerous grounds.
I think that's first and foremost. I mean, his supporters are delirious about supporting him, and the Democrats are equally or more delirious about upending him and ruining his reputation. I think the thing about Trump is they've made a couple of mistakes. I mean, not least of which is the whole Russiagate thing, which is where it started. Is, this thing blows up and ends up in nothing. In fact, it shows that as far as Russia's involvement in anything goes, it may more lead to the Democratic Party. So this may, I mean, one doesn't know, and I'm not a fan of the man, but this may be an election boost among his devoted followers. In other words, they'll take him whatever comes out, however it comes out. I think for a man involved in the construction industry, paying hush money through your lawyer is probably, in an afternoon's
business
work,
as usual.
Not an issue. And also, it's a kind of, as one thing, it's kind of like, is this it? I mean, is this the best you could do to get to? I mean, let me put it this way. I wait with bated breath to see when Joe Biden is out of power and has less sort of sway, what happens with his son and the laptop. I think I suspect it'll make Donald Trump's charge look really, really minor by comparison. But what strikes me as funny is, as you mentioned, the jury, they selected a jury for them to pronounce on the indictment. Can you imagine what it must have been like to select an unbiased jury? I mean, it must have taken. Maybe that's why it's taken a very long time for this thing to come to this point. Is because, nothing. And I also like the fact, do you call her an adult movie star or movie actress, or do you call her a porn star? I mean, that's the stuff that politics is made of. That sort of slightly sleazy. It just strikes me as if that's the best they can do. No, I'm not convinced.
You bring up two important issues there. One is the Steele dossier and the Hunter Biden laptop story, which we know the FBI went out of its way to hush so that it doesn't interfere with Biden's election. Martin, what do you think about the politicization of the criminal justice system on the left? And do you think it's going to come back to bite them? Because there were allegations that not only did Hillary Clinton fund the Steele dossier, but that she also paid the FBI hush money or bribe money, that it never comes out that the DNC actually funded this dossier.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why you've never seen former presidents or sitting presidents taken up on criminal charges. And that is because this isn't really, this is something that I think both sides of the aisle have thought about very deeply. And I mean, I think it's fair enough, because once you do this, what they're doing now, and you actually start picking things and going after people, then you're basically saying it's always fair in love and war. And that means that next it's going to be Biden, then it's going to be the next Republican president, and it's going to be a never-ending cycle of current administrations trying to get at their predecessors. So to some extent, I can understand the logic behind kind of the informal agreement that, listen, we will forgive what you did during your administration, just so that we can ensure this stability of the political system per se, and stand in the way of the law being politicized in this manner. Because I think a lot of people around Trump are making this point very emotionally now, but there's some truth there, and Sara just touched on this, and that is that it's going to be virtually impossible to get a fair trial. Whether you're Trump, Obama, or Hillary Clinton, or Joe Biden, or Calvin Coolidge, or Ronald Reagan, the fact is your jury and your judge and your prosecutors, everyone has political opinions, everyone has views on your administration, on the decisions you took while in office. You're just not going to get an impartial jury, an impartial prosecutor, or really an impartial judge. So this is really a minefield in many ways. So I can understand the logic behind not doing it, be up to now. But then again, as I said, there is this rule of law tension. The kind of the social contract is that if you do wrong, you should go before the justice system, just like if we do wrong, we go before the justice system. So there's two competing, I guess, social values here, both around stability and continuity of government, and on the other hand, equal application of the law. So it's a very difficult thing, but of course, the left has become so unhinged in, I would say, the last 2 decades, that it's hardly surprising that this established tradition of not persecuting or prosecuting former leaders is now being thrown to the wind. And that really does open Pandora's box in a way. We don't really know what comes next.
Yeah, so you point out an important tension there, the tension between application of the law across the board, despite who you are, in this case it's the former president, versus the testing of state power, right? Which is, we are in power today, so we go against the opposition, and then they come in power, and then they revenge, and then the cycle goes on and on and on. Well, we will stay in touch to see how that ends up. Trump is likely to plead not guilty. He said he hasn't done anything wrong, denies this relationship in its entirety. But we'll see. If they couldn't pin him on this, I'm sure they'll find something to deter him from running for 2024. Okay, so we move on to the next issue, which is that Treasury explains why it has exempted Eskom from disclosing irregular and wasteful expenditure. Okay, the article reads, National Treasury has provided its reasoning for granting embattled power utility Eskom a partial exemption to sections of the PFMA, the Public Finance Management Act. It said, through a government gazette on Friday, 31 March, Treasury exempted Eskom from sections 55(2)(b)(1) of the PFMA and Treasury Regulation 28.2.1 for a period of 3 years. Under these exemptions, Eskom is no longer required to disclose financial information related to irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure in its financial statements. Treasury said that it was done for several reasons, but primarily to protect Eskom's credit rating and audit opinion, which could have disastrous knock-on effects on the company's financials and loans were they to move in a negative direction. So pre the show, you were talking about how the IMF was here about a week or 2 weeks ago, giving us a glimpse into what the discussions really like is for this the minister's actions following that meeting, to deciding not to disclose irregular expenditure. How do you think these two events influence?
Well, what struck me, because we sort of surmised a bit about it yesterday, but we didn't know very much. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just I'm not a finance person at all. I mean, when the IMF was here, what the IMF had originally done was forecast 1.2% growth, which is pretty lousy on anybody's terms. Once they got here and did a tour of whatever, they revised it to 0.1%, which is actually no growth, because I think it's just they're putting 0.1% because 0% just looks terrible. In other words, I do not think they were impressed. But what I don't understand is he has said that the reason is to boost their credit rating. But with these things not appearing on the books, it would strengthen their credit rating, and it would still allow them to borrow, or they still be people will still be amenable to lending to them. Except I would assume that if we know that the exemption's been granted, then the IMF and the World Bank and everyone else knows that an exemption's been granted. And it's one of those things where if an exemption's been granted, which is, the general commentary is this is not a good thing. South Africans are not impressed at all. Then surely the IMF or the World Bank or whoever it might be is going to say, hang on, these guys have been given an exemption. We know that they're riddled with corruption, irregular expenditure, waste, etc., etc. Oh no, we they've been granted exemption. We're not going to take something from that. I don't know. I would certainly take something from that if I were them, and I'd be very surprised if they didn't know before we did. So I'm not entirely sure that to me, the only takeout you can get from this is negative, and that is that, we're trying to hide Eskom's financial position in order to hoodwink the lenders and the ratings agencies. So, and as Martin may know more about this arcane field than I do, but it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Martin, do you remember those comments made by the Minister of Electricity recently that the problem is not corruption? Mass corruption is not the problem. The problem is that Eskom does not have enough funds. Sara says this is Eskom trying to hoodwink the lending agencies. Do you think they are trying to apply for loans and they need to basically cover up for irregular expenditure to enable them to do that?
This whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's so where to even start? So let's start with what the minister said. It was him who said it's not only corruption at Eskom, or it's not corruption that's led to load shedding, it's other things. And the chair of the Eskom board, I think last week, said no, it's people say 80% of Eskom is corrupt. No, that can't be. So there is this concerted effort by high-placed people to say no, actually no, Eskom is not corrupt. And now the books will reflect that. Voila! Look, the books say we're not corrupt. So that's the first thing. The second thing is both the IMF and the World Bank have offices in South Africa, not far from where I live. Like they have they have employees who actually live here, who wake up every morning of the business day and SABC News, and every private lender as well, imaginable, is looking at South Africa's media. So, I mean, if I were to put myself in that position, I would rather know what the irregular expenditure is in the organization than for the organization to say, no, we can't show you because it's that bad. It's like, well, that's worse. Let me rather put a number to it, then I can make a decision based on, is it bad enough for me not to trust you at all, But if you don't want to give me any number whatsoever, then I mean, there is no talk even of me supporting you. So that's the other ridiculous part of it. So what Treasury is doing, by its own admission, really, if we look at what they're saying, is they're hiding the reality of what's happening in Eskom. Now, South Africa's constitution is one of few in the world that makes repeated reference to accountability and to openness and transparency in government. And these values are supposed to permeate everything government does. And this is a direct negation of that. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a hell of a lot of litigation on this. I would encourage that. Because it's I would say it's clearly unconstitutional for the minister to even have the power to cover up irregularities. Now this gets to another thing that they said, the Treasury said, and that is that, oh no, irregular expenditure is a legal term. Don't be misguided by it. It doesn't mean it's corruption. It just means it's not in accordance with legislation. Now, I mean, that's a nice legal way of saying irregular expenditure just means unlawful expenditure. Now, yes, that's not necessarily criminal corruption, but I mean, it's as bad. If the legislation doesn't authorize you to spend money in this way and you do it anyway, that's bad. That's not a good thing. That's something that I think should be condemned in the same way that corrupt expenditure is, because it basically comes down to the same illegality. You're doing something that the law does not allow you to do. And the last thing on this is that this is not the first time this has happened. When I did my research, I saw that this happened last year as well. It went kind of underneath the radar, but they exempted Eskom from this very same requirement for the year before last year and last year into this year. So this is just a renewal of that for another 2 years, this year and another 2, so 3. So this has already happened. But the interesting thing is, last year's exemption included what's the word? Recording of any losses from criminal conduct. So this year they exempt only irregular and wasteful expenditure. Last year they said you don't even have to report on actual criminal losses from criminal conduct, corruption, actual corruption. Eskom was exempted from reporting that for 2 years. And this is, I mean, look, what else can the South African government do to manifest its contempt for ordinary South Africans in a greater way than this? To say that we'll show the Auditor General, but she's not allowed to tell you plebs, and she's not allowed to tell the World Bank or private banks or lenders. So the whole thing is calculated to woodwink you, the electorate, the South African electorate, and private parties on who we rely for financing. It is the embodiment of bad faith. It is the embodiment of malicious conduct. And as I said, I would be very happy to see some urgent litigation on this point. And I'm surprised that it didn't already happen last year. So this whole thing is really ridiculous.
Just when you touched on the chair of the board of Eskom, Makone, he's actually the one that applied for this extension of the exemption. So the board is in on this too, instead of acting as a safeguard. And even talking about litigation, Sarah, before all of that, where is Parliament's committees on this? Ethics committee, oversight committee, and what discretion does the minister have to do this? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the ethics committee, oversight committees have gone on holiday indefinitely. I think it's got to our attention because between the first and second exemption, you've had so much more disclosure about the criminality that's been going on at Eskom. So everyone is very focused on it. So this time around, you apply for the exemption and people really do notice. I mean, I think I've heard the tail end of an interview with Piet Leroux of Sakelege, and I suspect it's going to be an organization like that would launch legal proceedings against it. But I think I suspect they kind of hope that if it was done, they haven't said so, but if the rubric of the state of disaster, is under which everything needs to be done, I'm sure they probably think that they would be able to get away with it, because we have a state of disaster. And I've no doubt. I mean, the minute they announced a state of disaster, I thought, what in earth are they going to try and hide? Let's put it this way. I think Eskom's reputation all around is so appalling that the ANC may as well bite the bullet, dismantle, and sell off to the private sector. It's trying to do everything but get people who can possibly save anything to save anything. And wow, I mean, you have to, in a way, you have to admire the ANC for sticking with this really absurd ideology for as long as they have. It's proved its lack of worth, and let's put it this way: anything that creates a level of opacity as opposed to transparency, I think we will just look at completely, with complete disgust, because our only assumption is going to be that it's to shield the wrongdoers.
Yeah, no, you paint a chilling picture there of the Trojan horse that was the state of emergency, coupled with the electricity minister who says nothing to see here, no corruption, no mass corruption, at least at Eskom. And now they're coming in with this exemption to hide irregular expenditure. Let's move on to our last story for today. We are merging two stories here. They're both about SARS and different collections inside of the organization. The first one is that only 6,000 new personal income taxpayers contributed tax last year. So out of the 1.17 million new taxpayers who registered with SARS, how only 0.5% ended up contributing to personal income tax in the past year. And with that, it says SARS collects more than 2 trillion, but VAT refunds surge by almost 22%. So the South African Revenue Services, SARS, collected just over 2 trillion rands in gross tax revenues over the past year, a 9.7% increase from the 2021-2022 tax year. It says, but of the 2 trillion gross tax revenue, 5 billion was below SARS's own revised estimate. So it seems SARS is able to collect a lot of money on the VAT side, coming below target, but still doing well. I mean, they collected 2 trillion gross tax, 5 billion of it was refunded. And then on the personal income tax side, adding only 6,000 people to the pool of personal income taxpayers, that number grows to something like 26 million taxpayers in South Africa. The burden that is on the taxpayer, Martin, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the insult to injury here is the very little bang for buck that comes from paying taxes in South Africa. That's why people in Norway and Sweden are probably not too perturbed whenever their very high taxes go up still, because they know they get service from that. But in South Africa, it's basically an insult when SARS makes these announcements and says, "Oh, hooray! Look at us! This is the biggest tax collection year that we've had in recent history." As if it's celebrating that we're now using this money that you give us, that we extract from you coercively, to deliver services and so on, which we know is simply not the reality. And part of why we know that is because the plurality of government spending every year goes exclusively to the public sector wage bill, simply into salaries of government employees. That's the plurality of our spending. And any South African who interfaces with civil servants on a daily basis knows that we have a problem of what Dawie Rood calls an underworked and an overpaid civil service. Now, if that was a significantly smaller part of our budgeting, civil servants, then I think South Africans would probably be a little less perturbed by this. If, for instance, our huge spending on education, despite dismal results, was channeled into vouchers, which doesn't require 10,000 incompetent teachers, but just a few administrators to give ordinary South Africans vouchers to spend at private schools, for instance, I think it would hurt less. So yeah, it's hardly surprising that you see the amount of refunds and also the increasing levels of tax non-compliance from South Africans, given how South Africans know what precisely it is that we are funding. We are funding an incompetent and corrupt and unfortunately ideologically compromised as well civil service that seems on particularly bad days to specifically be out to destroy the economy, as if that is like a goal of government. And then for SARS to celebrate taking even more money from us. Yeah, that's it's a problem. And then as you point out, the fact is fewer and fewer taxpayers are starting to carry more and more of the tax burden. And my hope, I guess, is that the same type of pragmatism that is kicking in when it comes to electricity, with liberalizations of electricity provision and so on, opening up the market, I'm hoping that kicks in at some soon time with government as regards taxes, so that tax rates can be lowered. So that I'm not going to say we need to cut welfare spending. That's simply not practical at this stage. But that the civil service wage bill can also be significantly cut, so that fewer taxes can go further. And we simply need that level of pragmatism right now.
Yeah. So we've already gone over time, Sarah, but I think you may want to comment about what the article talks about further down. Describes how 200,000 students are issued out by these higher learning institutions, contributing to the pool of unemployment, but clearly only 6,000 people get absorbed into the labor market in a meaningful way, right? Any final closing thoughts on that?
No, look, I mean, there's nothing almost to be said about the results of education in this country. The abuse and the fact that people just come out badly educated, and of course that has consequences for their futures. There's no doubt there's a tie from the one to the other. And the only other thing I can say is, while Martin was talking, I was thinking, yeah, we South African taxpayers are really pissed off because we know that money is just going to be shoved down the funnel of Kusile. And then it struck me that Kusile doesn't have a funnel. So,
yeah, all right. That's all we'll have time for today. Be sure to tune in to the Daily Friend Show for the rest of the week. There'll be a different host tomorrow and the day after. And we send our best regards to Nicholas in his absence. Thank you for joining, and goodbye.